Welcome back to the podcast, Gabriella. I'm so happy to have you.
Thank you so much. It's so lovely when I get to invited back so that I know that, okay, the first conversation went really well and people have gotten benefit, and it's always wonderful. So thank you for having me.
Of course. And we covered so many different things, but I'd like to get a little bit more deep dive with you on a topic that I hear often. And it's a topic I feel pretty passionate about too, because I think that there's a lot of misconception about it. And it's fertility over 40. People even say, after 35, it just goes
Mhm.
nosedive. And I've seen so many conceptions happen after 40. And then you also, I always love sharing the Guinness Book of World Records, Dawn Brooks, who got pregnant and had a healthy baby at 59
Wow.
naturally,
Yeah,
randomly.
that's
And
wow.
so, those stories
I hope
are
that doesn't happen to me, Michelle. All I have to say.
that is so great. No, no, me too. Me too. I'm like, I'm good there. But it just shows the possibilities and how
Yeah. Yeah.
we believe in a certain like limit on what our bodies are capable of. And I know that you have a lot of amazing you've had a lot of results in that, and worked with a lot of people over 40. So I'd love to really explore that topic
Yeah,
and just your
absolutely.
experience in that. Yeah, for sure.
I think that you've started at exactly where I think a lot of people land when they first hear of the conversation of fertility or infertility, is that after 35, your fertility takes a nosedive. And it's like, oh
Hmm.
my God, can we please stop perpetuating that? It's
Hmm.
not to say that biologically, women do have at this point, and it's interesting because, every time I start this conversation, I think about how obsolete this conversation is going to be in 50 years from now,
Hmm.
because right now we do have a biological limit in terms of women are born with all the eggs that we will ever have. But I am pretty certain that, in a not so distant future, with all of the research that's going on regarding stem cells and, different aspects, and I don't want to say specific things because we're still very early on. I often get asked about procedures right now that people, see as possibly available to them. And the evidence really isn't there for a lot of these things that are being sold, quote unquote, in
Hmm.
the marketplace to women who are desperate and
Yeah.
who want to, give themselves the best possible chance of having a baby. And so
Hmm.
I'm always hesitant to say, women need to do things to improve their egg quality from a perspective of high level interventions. There are absolutely things that are going to make a huge difference in terms of improving egg quality for women at any age that
Hmm.
come from taking charge of the things you do and optimizing results. So, from that perspective, and we'll dive deeper into that, I highly recommend that people pay attention to the things that they're exposed to in their day to day, the choices that we make. All of those things will be important when it comes to egg quality. But, going back to the conversation that we were just having, when we talk about in the next 50 years where it's going to and how it's going to be possible for ovarian reserve to replenish itself or for us to be able to develop more eggs and have babies with our own eggs and extend the longevity of reproduction for women, the sky's the limit, I think, as we start to dive deep into these new and uncharted waters. But we're still kind of very early on in that process. Yes, there are some animal model studies, there are some
Yeah.
interesting, things that are being done in terms of science, but from a viability perspective of it actually being done right now, it's we're not there yet. So we have to then have the concept that we don't want to be delaying fertility for the sake of delaying or for the sake of the fact that, it is true that average the life expectancy rates of populations have increased drastically. Just 50 years ago, if you think about it, we were dying at 50 or 60, whereas the life expectancy today in Western countries, I mean, I know that in Australia, it's 84.5 years for females, so you think about that and you go, wow, okay. So if I'm going to be alive with good quality of life into my 80s, and fertility wise, let's say menopause is the natural end of, and again, in these types of cases where women are conceiving afterwards, it's not that it's impossible, it's just that it
Right.
becomes highly unlikely.
Mm-hmm.
But post menopause, but before menopause, certainly we need to start thinking about the fact that, okay, if we're hitting menopause, say on average at 45 to 50, and we know that 5 to 10 years before menopause, and the diagnostic criteria there is 1 year of no periods
Mm-hmm.
after, you basically have ceased periods for 1 year and your FSH levels rise, your estrogen levels decrease, then okay, I am in menopause. 5 to 10 years before that, women find themselves into this stage called perimenopause, which is where there are more imbalances in terms of hormonal levels. There are more challenges in terms of regularity of cycles, egg quality also decreases, and ovarian reserve decreases as well. And so, from that perspective, we do have to take into account that we right now will hit that place somewhere. If we talk about 5 to 10 years before, if somebody hits menopause at 45, then, from 35 to 40, they already are potentially in that perimenopause stage. If they
Mm-hmm.
hit menopause at 50, at 45 to 40, they are already in that perimenopausal stage. In perimenopause, it is not impossible. In fact, there are still many things you can do to optimize the chances of taking home a healthy baby. And
Mm-hmm.
so a lot of the patients that we would be seeing would be in that kind of, 30 to say 45, range, where they could potentially, and certainly when we talk about premature ovarian failure or premature ovarian insufficiency, where a woman is much younger and has a very elevated FSH and ovarian reserve that's much declined, it obviously also comes into the conversation of like, okay, is it still possible to optimize the egg quality that is remaining so that we can improve the chances of taking home a healthy baby? And the answer is absolutely yes. And in those situations, what is really important to highlight, and I think that it's even more important to take into consideration, is the fact that if we do have low ovarian reserve and if we do have impacted egg quality, sperm quality becomes of paramount importance, because it is the egg that has to, do all of the work to ensure that we don't have the errors in the DNA of the sperm being passed on to a potential embryo or a potential child. And so what happens is the egg has to utilize its own energy production, its mitochondria that is already kind of struggling a little bit for improving its own division and maturation process. And then, of course, we'll have to go on to produce an embryo development, process. It's going to have a much harder time if the sperm is not good quality, right? If it's having to utilize its energy to eradicate or prevent those DNA fragmentation errors to be passed on to the baby, it's going to have less energy for embryo development and, kind of that whole process. So that's where we need to start really looking at this conversation that we've talked about before. And I always say that fertility is a team sport. And this is very much why, because from a mechanistic perspective, if we don't have the best quality sperm, we are going to be putting an additional burden on
Mm-hmm.
the egg that is, that is not warranted. And certainly that didn't need to be there.
Yeah.
So, even though, and I think that this is the important takeaway, from this whole conversation is that as much as at this stage we want to think that female fertility can be extended beyond, its kind of quote unquote natural stages, it cannot. And so we do have to ensure that we're being smart about what it is that we do. We're not delaying. And it's important also for men to realize that because male fertility is seen as more infinite, so to speak. It's not infinite by any means,
Yeah, it's
right?
true.
But we do hear in the media, Hugh Hefner made a Playboy bunny pregnant, at 90. And you kind of go, well, yeah, but she was 20,
Right.
And so it's a very different situation with mitochondrial health being different and egg quality parameters being, different at a much earlier age. It can afford to utilize its energy to fix the errors in a 90-year-old sperm, as opposed to, and the sperm is not 90-year-old because obviously sperm is being produced throughout a male's lifetime.
Right.
But the quality of its DNA certainly does decrease with time. And so, it's a different conversation. So I think that a lot of men think that, oh, I don't really need to worry about my fertility so much because obviously, it's a woman's issue, which again, hopefully by now people understand that it's not and why it's not. But we are seeing that, sperm parameters are declining with age and as the passing of time. Just even, like I was reading an analysis the other day that was talking about the fact that since the 1970s, male sperm counts have decreased by 60%. 60%.
Yeah, I've heard of that. It's nuts.
It's absolutely insane.
So the normal today is not by any means what the normal used to be. So the normal's been like almost dumbed down to be considered normal.
And this is the thing that a lot of times people don't understand is that reference ranges for lab results actually are derived from the population. So what happens is that if health is declining in the entire population over time, and diabetes diagnosis and blood sugar level, parameters and insulin parameters are a great example of this, and they also drastically impact fertility. But sperm is another one where, what a normal sperm count used to be in the 70s is literally 60 times higher, 60% higher than it is now. And now it's like, you get 20 million, which is the minimum that, we need to have now. And most men struggle, who are having fertility problems, especially, a huge percentage of the population who struggle to conceive. If we talk about the fact that it's a 40% male factor, 40% female factor, and 20% embryonic factor, the reasons as to why people don't conceive or take a healthy pregnancy to term. So again, increased risk of miscarriage, increased risk of infertility becomes a major issue here. It's not a woman's thing at all. It's actually a couple's thing to begin with that then gets impacted by the embryo that ensues from those originating cells. So if we want to make those embryos into healthier embryos, we do have to pay attention to what's happening in terms of egg quality and sperm quality for sure.
And what do you think it is that causes it? I mean, we know environmental toxins. Like, what are your thoughts on why it's declining?
Look, absolutely, environmental toxins will play a role. But if you also think about how men used to work back in, the 50s, 60s, the 50s, we started to have more office work, right? Being part of the day-to-day. But, there used to be a lot more movement in general in terms of people actually not sitting down at their desk the whole day.
That's true.
There used to be a lot more activity. And if you think about just purely from a heat perspective that we know impacts sperm, we know that sedentary behavior increases the risk of many chronic illnesses, but it's also having a huge impact in terms of sperm because there is a reason why the testicles hang outside of the body. It's because typically the testicles, in order to produce quality sperm, need to be about 1 degree centigrade lower than the rest of the body. And so what that means is that if we are heating the testicles because we're sitting, men are sitting on it the whole day on their desks and doing computer work, or they have occupational hazards that are part of, that conversation. And then they go outside and they engage in cycling that, lycra tights,
Or have
and
their
do
phone in
all
their
sorts,
front pockets.
or have their phones in their pockets, or go in the baths or spas or saunas, anything that increases heat to the testicles is going to negatively impact sperm. And, sitting down on the couch all day for 4 hours watching Netflix after work, they've already been sitting all day, is certainly not going to be beneficial. But then, outside of that obvious kind of very physical mechanistic process, there is also the fact that, we do have more endocrine disruptors than ever in our environment. And so what that ends up meaning or translating into is the fact that, okay, now what we have is a situation where there are exposures from our food, from where our food is packaged, to what we put in our bodies and the air we breathe, that really are impacting that lock and key that is how the endocrine system operates. The cell is the lock and the hormone is the key. A hormone is a substance that, is built in one part of the body and affects another part of the body. And what happens with these endocrine disruptors is that they mimic the key. And so you end up with something that is, estrogen, and a lot of these endocrine disruptors are estrogenic. Now, men need to have a higher dose of testosterone in their circulating in their body in order to be able to produce sperm. And because a lot of these endocrine disruptors are estrogenic, what ends up happening is that they're being loaded with additional estrogens that were never naturally found, in most men's bloodstreams, and certainly not in the cell receptors that these mimicking chemicals find themselves in. And so instead of, the cell receptor for testosterone having a molecule of testosterone in that cell receptor that's going to do the right job that is encoded for it to do, it has a mimicking molecule that basically essentially changes the function or the instruction that is delivered to that cell. And so we end up with issues that, obviously we didn't anticipate in terms of many health conditions. I mean, we're seeing lots of different estrogen-related cancers in men these days because of this very reason. So, I think that there is an environmental component that is really a big part of what we need to take into account as well.
And now I'm learning about LEDs and how, we're so programmed by light, and our bodies really respond to the circadian rhythm of nature. So then you have LEDs, which don't have a complete spectrum. It can confuse the body as well. And I'm learning about that. There's so many aspects of how we're living. It's crazy.
Yeah. Look, this is the thing. I think the human body is highly unprepared for modern life. There's that, and especially the speed in which technology is developing and unveiling new and improved, quote unquote, ways of living. Certainly convenience is at an all-time high. Our bodies, they weren't built for convenience, really. If you think about it, what actually kept us healthy was the struggle, right? And so we're now in a situation where we don't have those same struggles in the day-to-day, and we have to add back some friction to be able to, really help the body to kind of rebalance. And, this is one of those other really interesting points too, that, the adaptation response that is required for the body to be in homeostasis is also being confused, right? So there is a lot that the body can take, but for the most part, one of the things that I think we need to understand, and it's almost kind of like going back to an earlier time, so to speak, is the fact that the body really does know what to do. Its internal wisdom is impressive on so many levels, right? And so sometimes it's not what we need to do. It's not doing more that is the answer. It's like, what are the things that we need to stop doing? Right? What are the things that we need to remove from our day to day that actually helps to enhance the way that our body operates simply from it not being there. And I think identifying those things for ourselves, that each person kind of knows, like
Hmm.
if I was to go back to a more natural way of living, what does that look like?
Yeah,
I think that that's a question that more and more we're going to need to ask ourselves. And it's not to say that, we ignore technology or these conveniences. There are many, many things that, are wonderful. I mean, just the development of antibiotics, for one, is, like
true.
I would never, if somebody needs antibiotics, I'd be the first one to be saying, go take it. Like there's
Yeah,
no need to apply some herbal medicine to, something that will be resolved for, with an antibiotic. Like, sometimes I get patients in my clinic that have literal infections that are silent but are causing infertility. Chlamydia is, a
right.
common one. Like, I'm not going to be telling them, oh, here, take a bottle of herbal medicines. It's not that I don't
Yeah,
use herbal medicines. We certainly do where it's indicated and where it's necessary. And there are some incredible benefits to utilizing it. But it's about knowing what tool to use when, rather than
correct.
we only do one thing or we only do things in a certain way, because then we lose the benefits of technology and development and we
Right.
start to add friction where we shouldn't.
Yeah, 100%. I think that everything, if you really take all of the different technologies and look at the ancient wisdom and then also the modern technology and combine it, and I think that that's what makes a really good practitioner is somebody who can decipher what's needed and
Yeah,
when.
absolutely, 100%. And also, I think that, it's about patients learning where things are most effective. Let me give you an example. Sometimes I often have people asking me about, like, should I take metformin, right, for improving my insulin resistance? And I
And some
say,
people for
well,
equality, they say they're
that's
being
right.
told.
And
Yeah,
it's actually for implantation. There's a lot of studies now coming out. And some of these studies, by the way, they're not actually human studies, they're animal models. And so
yeah,
I think that one of the really important things to highlight here is that there's a lot that gets talked about, especially on social media. Like yesterday, I did a video. I do a lot of patient education on my Instagram account. Gabriella Rosa Fertility is the handle. But, like yesterday, I did a video on seed cycling because seed cycling is something that gets perpetuated a lot. There
hmm,
is no human evidence on the impact of seeds on hormonal regulation in the body.
hmm,
Okay.
hmm,
Now, if you like seeds, and you want to eat them, they're crunchy, they're delicious in salads, they're going to provide fiber, they're going to provide some omegas. It's not that I'm saying don't eat seeds. It's
yeah,
that the way in which people then want to extrapolate evidence from an animal model or an animal study into human, processing is inaccurate at best and dangerous at worst. Because what ends up happening is that then people think that, okay, I'm going to not take the appropriate treatment
hmm,
to go and do something that is being denoted on social media as, their natural way to improve my hormones. And it just bollocks. It doesn't work. It's not actually, the intention of benefit is there, but good intentions aren't everything. Sure, placebo still results in 30% of the benefits in drug trials. 30% of the result is actually derived from placebo. So
it's
if
pretty
you think it
wild.
works, it probably, will give you some benefit. But the
As long as it
reality
doesn't
is,
have harm, and that's the key.
but you
Like
see, but this is the
seeds, yeah,
problem. The problem is that there is harm because if you think about it, if somebody is taking quote unquote some, trendy whatever from social media and applying that instead of applying effectiveness and effective treatment,
hmm,
they've lost the opportunity to actually make a difference to their situation. And so there is harm in that. And I think that there is a lot that we need to take into account when we are making recommendations to general public, that there is no neutral effect in a recommendation that a practitioner makes, because the practitioner at the end of the day is being seen as the person that is guiding that individual towards hopefully a better outcome. And so if we're giving, evidence-based rubbish as recommendations, people get confused. And in that, there is harm, whether it's misinformation that's not derived from a malice of wanting to misinform to make money, which then becomes disinformation. It doesn't matter, because by the time somebody has lost the opportunity to have a baby altogether because they were doing 1,000 things that would actually not move the needle in that particular situation, because they heard from a book, or they heard from a forum, or they heard from somebody's social media account that it's the thing to do, well, we've done harm, right?
I
And
would
I
say
think
like
that that's
taking
the problem.
DHEA is harmful. Like things like that,
Oof.
like is really harmful because without knowing what's really happening in your body, and people do. I mean, because you're able to get the supplements, those kind of things. But if you're having, certain diets, of course, if you're doing it like instead of something else, then yes, it's harmful. But if you're doing it in addition, and it's just like it's really just adding more things to your diet, different story.
Oh, for sure. I think that, again, it's really how people understand the communication of accurate information, right?
Yeah.
But going back to the example in terms of like metformin, the best way still, and I've done extensive reviews on this topic, because insulin resistance is one of the biggest issues when it comes to ovulation, failure, irregularity of cycles, sperm parameter issues, and it's silent. And usually people don't even understand that they have it, or their doctors don't even get to diagnose it because they do it too late. And so what happens is that the best way still, if you go to the evidence and you can do a clinical, a full literature review on this, and you will find that still the best way to improve insulin resistance and blood sugar parameters is diet and exercise.
Mm-hmm.
If in some instances it's necessary because people either are not compliant enough, or they have some other issues in terms of the compliance aspect, then sure, we can add medications to that. And of course, where there are metabolic disease already in situ, then obviously there might be a need for medications to help to correct those issues. If somebody already has diabetes, then yes, take your insulin, right? But the reality of it is that when we are looking at hormonal imbalances derived from a metabolic place in terms of like blood sugar dysregulation, insulin resistance, in the very early stages, diet and exercise is going to be better than drugs and medication. But that's not the message that most people receive or understand, because, well, there are misaligned interests in the healthcare system, right?
Yeah,
And we
unfortunately.
also, as patients, most people want convenience. So most
True.
people are going to like, if I can take a pill and not have to bother about all of these other things that take time, effort, energy, and so on, then I might just take the pill. But that goes back to the conversation that we were having before, where the convenience is actually not in our best interest, right? Because this is precisely where, like, if you really want to improve insulin resistance, hey, 45 minutes of zone range 2 heart rate range training, 45 minutes 3 to 4 times a week, and go build muscle at the gym, and you're going to do a much better job at your overall health. The way that I like to think about this in terms of building muscle and that whole mitochondrial impact throughout all of your cells that are going to help to improve every aspect of health and fertility, it's almost like muscle is the air filter of the system, air purifier, so to speak. So it's going to be removing and utilizing items and things within the bloodstream that actually is going to help the environment for the egg maturation period and for the sperm maturation or development period to happen in a better way. So by us ensuring that we are implementing healthy strategies in our day-to-day, from building muscle to a healthy diet, we're going to be not only impacting our cells and how our body operates in general, but we are going to be having a very direct impact on fertility from adding those strategies. So it really is, it's a comprehensive approach that's going to ultimately optimize the chances of taking home a healthy baby. But knowing when to utilize convenience and knowing when to actually go for the hard stuff at the gym
Mm-hmm.
is a really important part of this conversation for optimizing fertility over 40 or at any age,
Yeah.
right? One of the things that I do say to my patients all the time is that if you want to improve and optimize your mitochondrial health for your eggs, and this is not going to have a direct impact on eggs necessarily, but what happens is that if your body is in better health overall and your mitochondrial health is better in your body overall, what ends up happening is that it gives those cells that are in development better opportunity to be healthier. And that
Mm-hmm.
can only improve your fertility outcomes.
Yeah, 100%. It really is truly like a holistic approach. And to understand that your body is not made in little, you're not focusing on the puzzle pieces. You're looking at the whole picture and how everything impacts everything. And then, even worse than metformin, this whole Ozemic baby trend
Mm.
that's happening. And people don't realize that in some cases, it can really impact digestive system and in a way that's irreversible. So it's not coming for free. And there's always like, the shortcuts that people, they've had stories when we were little, like on shortcuts and how
Yeah.
nothing is for free. There's no such thing as a shortcut.
You see, this is the thing, and I think that that's a really important thing for people to realize. Like, GLP-1s are a miracle. Like, honestly, they are a miracle of modern technology and of pharmaceutical prowess. Like, I will take my hat off any day of the week and say that, for certain people with developed disease, it's going to be, and particularly where they struggle with implementation, they struggle with, a whole bunch of things. It's not that it's something, I don't see it personally. I have the same view about every aspect of medicalization, right? There is a time and a place for certain things. And,
Mm-hmm.
with GLP-1s, there is definitely a time and a place where that might be useful. But it does not replace, and I think that this is the important takeaway message. It does not replace people having to take ownership and responsibility for their day-to-day actions, their behaviors,
Mm-hmm.
their habits, and it's an aid. For sure, it's an aid. And for some people, it actually is going to make the entire difference between them dropping enough weight in a sustainable way that it enables them to be able to have a healthy pregnancy. Make the mistake about it. Being overweight, insulin resistance, and diabetes, all of those metabolic health conditions drastically negatively impact egg and sperm quality and uterine receptivity, and therefore the ability to actually carry a healthy pregnancy to term. Now, there's also no evidence suggesting that it's entirely safe, and you're absolutely right that there is no free lunch here, right? So it's not something that is going to be a situation where you can take it with no repercussions. There's always going to be repercussions. There are kind of cost effectiveness and effectiveness analysis
Mm-hmm.
and pros and cons that you have to put into consideration when you are making a decision to use or not use certain treatments. So the thing about it is that if somebody is in a situation where they would have to choose between bariatric surgery or GLP-1s, I'd be going GLP-1s any day of the week.
Right. Of course. It's risk versus
Like,
benefit. Yeah.
exactly. Because, with bariatric surgery, like that stuff is permanent. You're going to have permanent nutritional deficiency issues. You're going to have multiple other health condition issues to deal with later down the track from something that, is very, very permanent. Now, mind you, some people with, morbid obesity, maybe that might be the only way for them to be able to actually get their health back on track. And so it's not to say that there is a right or wrong approach. There is an approach that is going to actually support the values and preferences of the patient. And I think that that's one of the really important things that we need to take into account. For some people, certain decisions, particularly in terms of their health, is going to be determined by their values and preferences, and taking those into consideration is the job of any clinician, right? So we are not going to be saying to people, oh no, this is the only way. And I mean, certain clinicians do, and that's just, it's them. I don't think that we're going into an era in terms of healthcare where patients are highly educated. They have access to all of the same tools that clinicians have access to, and they use it. They will literally, sometimes I have seen patients in my clinic come in with detailed files of their situation, and they're lay people, right? But they have highly educated themselves on their situation and what's going on and what it is that they need, and they can ask and answer questions that some medical doctors cannot even understand yet. So we have to be also very mindful of the fact that the more that somebody educates themselves, the better they're going to be able to advocate for themselves. And I think that in this conversation of trying to get pregnant over 40, it's so important, because time is finite. It is essential that you don't just keep applying the same strategy hoping for a different result, but that you can clearly understand what are the options available to me in my situation and how best to stage those things in such a way that's actually going to benefit me, the patient, in the best possible way. And if medications are a part of that, and if surgery is a part of that, and if something else needs to be brought in as a part of that strategy, then it's much better that their clinician is able to guide that process than the patient tries to make these decisions and put these things together on their own and end up in the complete wrong place that they didn't intend as a result of not having that kind of support. So I think that there's a lot there to disentangle, but these are all very important considerations, particularly when all that most patients over 40 are going to hear is, you're running out of time, you need to hurry up and do IVF. And it's like, well, actually, I think that there's a whole lot more to it that, than just continuing to apply more treatment when we don't understand why treatment is failing. Because age is a proxy. It's a proxy for the underlying metabolic factors that are getting in the way to the healthiest possible outcome, which is, the normal outcome that we are wanting to see when it comes to fertility is you have sex, you get pregnant, you have a baby, we're done. We're no longer having this conversation. Anything other than that means that you may have investigated some, but there are still missing information that you need to arrive at to be able to transform results. So that's an important consideration for patients in this kind of situation that I have to say, it's one of the most important things in my clinic is understanding why. That's, my fertile method that we've been using for the last 24 years. The F in fertile is not what you think. It's actually fact-finding, It's the first step. So it's really important.
Yeah, for sure. And it's true. I agree with you. You first start with what you can do rather than going from 0 to 100 and then going straight for like the hardest medication, which I find happens a lot. And so this is why I feel it's very important. And from a Chinese medicine perspective, we look at the spleen and stomach and we want the digestive system to be optimal. You don't want to rush to do something too strong. You need to take the proper steps. You can't jump from like no foundation to like the third floor or whatever,
Yeah, absolutely. And, and this is the other thing too, is that the escalation of what's required, there is a timing for all of that, right?
Yeah.
And so understanding where someone is to where they need to be, but understanding what are the steps that they need to get there is critically important. Otherwise, we end up with more of the same. And, more of the same usually means no baby. And that obviously is not the outcome that patients are looking for.
So now I definitely want to get to this topic because it's new and exciting news that you've had, which is that you're currently undergoing or working on a clinical trial. And I'd love for you're going to explain it much better than me. So
No, for sure. I mean, look, I have been going on this kind of scientific joyride for the last 7 years. Finally, I've graduated from my master's in public health at Harvard, and that was where we did our first study of my patient results. Like we had a study of 544 patients going through our treatment and figured out that the live birth rate is 78.8% and lots of other really interesting things out of that. And that whetted my appetite for understanding more about, how to really answer scientific questions that are going to benefit my patients. And so I went into the Doctor of Public Health program at Harvard, and I'm about to graduate. Yay! In May.
That's amazing.
So May next year is my deadline. But as a result, part of what I wanted to really skill up on was running clinical trials. And so I'm running a clinical trial on testing and intervention, specifically focused on how it impacts infertility-related trauma, grief, and distress. So it's basically a writing intervention where people have a prompt that is their guided prompts. We have 2 groups. Everybody gets the intervention at the end of the study. But ultimately, looking at, there's a lot of evidence that supports writing in the way that we obviously are testing, and the impact in chronic diseases on the emotional component of how people experience their situation. Certainly, we know that infertility is a trauma-inducing event, right? And so figuring out ways, and unfortunately, even though that is the case, a lot of times people don't get given any kind of emotional support through very difficult, challenging fertility journeys. And so I wanted to really look at something that I have been using with my patients for many years and test it in a way that, I already knew that there was some benefit, because otherwise I wouldn't have gone into, doing this particular trial. But we really are looking at, what is the effect for people who really do self-report with, a high level of distress on their fertility journey. How can we, is there a way to actually help them to reduce that level of distress and that level of trauma reaction and the feelings of grief through the journey? And if so, is that a sustainable effect? So these are the questions that this study aiming to answer. It's called the INSPIRE study. And people can go to inspirestudy.online. So that I'm sure you will put that in the show notes, but inspirestudy.online. We're still recruiting. We need 220 females for this study. And the reason that we actually chose females only for this particular study is because we wanted to not have to disentangle the effect that could be differential between men and women. But, I have a hunch that the same effects that we would experience in terms of improvements in women would be derived in men as well. And I think that it's even a more important study, to be honest, because often if women don't get the support, the emotional support, men get it even less. Right. And so, that might be a future study that we'll be recruiting for sometime down the track. But for now, females over 18 who might be interested in addressing some of their emotional, challenges through the fertility journey can go to inspirestudy.online and get more information.
That's so exciting. And I'm very curious to see your findings, which I know it takes time. Everything takes time. It's like really something that you have to follow. And but I will be sharing this in the show notes, and I'll be also sharing it with my own patients. I think it's a really exciting thing. And anything that you can do really to give tools to people going through the fertility journey, it could be so confusing for so many people. And it really is. We were talking about this before before the show, is that a lot of this, and you had mentioned that people don't even realize that they need it. They don't even think about it, because anything that really comes down to mindset or emotions can feel very abstract. And when you're already in that state of mind, it's really hard to see how to get out of that. And so having the tools or something that makes it a little bit more digestible or manageable in any way can help so many people tremendously.
Yeah, 100%. It's interesting because my patient this morning was saying this to me. She literally was like, and she had gone through 12, imagine 12 failed IVF cycles and
Poor
4
thing.
miscarriages.
That's terrible.
And she said, I didn't realize until I got into your program, I didn't realize how much I was holding in terms of trauma and in terms of, how much I needed emotional support. And it's an experience that, my doctoral chair, the chair of my doctoral committee is an obstetrician gynecologist. She's actually the primary investigator of the Apple Women's Health Study. And an obstetrician gynecologist. And it's really interesting because we were talking about, this particular study, and obviously being part of her lab, I was presenting it to the team. And one of the big pieces of conversation about it was the fact that so much of the journey that people go through in terms of infertility is emotionally unsupported. She's extremely excited because, she works at the MGH, the Massachusetts General Hospital here in Boston. And she's really excited to be able to, depending on the results, to be able to give this as a tool for her patients and the patients in the hospital, going through IVF, to be able to utilize, because it's so easy. So easy to apply tool. It's very effective. And so, yeah, it'll be interesting to see results. I'm very excited as well.
Yeah. Well, I'm very excited, and I definitely want to be following up on you, and I'll be checking it out as it goes. So if you ever have any updates, feel free to let me know.
That is done. We could actually do a podcast, a show on taking people through the intervention.
Oh, that would be awesome. Amazing. Yeah, that would be really cool. So great. So if anybody wants to check it out, I will have that in the episode notes. And of course, as always, I really enjoy talking to you. I feel like I learned so much. You have such a great perspective that really has like a foot in both worlds, which I find to be tremendously impactful, of not just having one perspective, really understanding the science and kind of like looking through and working through the data, and then also having a holistic perspective on the different modalities that can help.
Thank you. And thank you for helping share the word. I think it's such an important thing that we do this. So thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Gabriella.